Probation is an alternative to a more restrictive sentence, whether that be jail, prison, or if you have the option of a work release program.
To me, probation is a test period to see whether an offender can successfully follow the rules of society.
I believe in that people can make a mistake and correct that, and if given the opportunity and the right type of support. And probation is an act of testing, an ability for a person to be given a second chance.
Probation is an opportunity. Probation is an opportunity for you to change your behavior. If you haven't been going to school, go to school. If you've been using drugs, stop using drugs. If you're breaking the law, stop breaking the law. Easier said than done. You have the power. You need to utilize it. You know, I'm here to coach you, to motivate you, to encourage you, and also to show that you're in compliance with the court's orders.
Sometimes justice needs to be served by going to the Department of Corrections, by serving a prison sentence, and sometimes not. Sometimes there are individuals that know what they did was wrong, they correct that problem, they pay their debt to society, and they're ready to regain back in the community and be a productive citizen. Anytime an individual goes to the county jail or goes to the Department of Corrections, it costs money. And probation is an opportunity to relieve some of that financial burden that the state and the county have in order to provide community safety.
You can't afford to lock up every person who has ever violated a law.
When you're on probation, you report, you're being monitored, someone is hopefully watching you so that you don't commit another crime.
A lot of people think probation is a slap on the wrist. People in the community think, oh, he only got sentenced to probation, that's no big deal. It is a big deal. Probation is jail without bars, and we are real active with these offenders. It's not they get to go home and 6 months later their case gets dismissed. They have roles and responsibilities that they have to meet, and some of those roles to you and I might be everyday things that we do, but to them it's difficult, and we are looking at creating change in these individuals. So it's not the slap on the wrist. It's us using the time that we have with these offenders to create changes in them that will hopefully allow them to lead law-abiding lives for the rest of their lives.
It is there to monitor the behavior and to offer assistance to probationers who really want to improve their lifestyle and their quality of life. We do a lot in terms of addressing substance abuse issues.
A lot of what we do is assess the needs that the individual has or the kid has, and we'll determine what services are appropriate and make referrals for those. And if we can be successful in hooking them up with some community-based resources that are out there that they can stay involved in on a long-term basis once the court's done with their case and don't need to be involved in their lives anymore, that's even better.
One of the things that I do as a probation officer is I'm an advocate, an assistant. I work with other agencies based upon the specific needs of the client. I try to network with other agencies in the community in order to get those services done so that the individual can have the services that he or she needs in order to be productive in society.
There's a lot that really needs to happen and needs to go on in that relationship that they have with their people on probation that can make a great difference as to the ultimate issue of whether or not they're going to be a recidivist or whether they're going to be successful in reforming their behavior and sometimes very difficult circumstances in their life. And a lot of it is about the offender taking responsibility for what they've done, for what they do in the future, the changes that they need to make. We have some that there's not anybody else in their life that really seems to care about what they do. or is interested in what they do, or is willing to say good job if they're successful on something. So there's a lot of that goes on with the relationship of a probation officer to their clients, to the offenders, that can make a great difference.
It's just much better if the individual can stay closer to home rather than being incarcerated, which is a huge obstacle in itself to overcome when they return to the community.
It's really safer for the community for us to do a good job monitoring them on probation than it is to lock them up. Realistically, you can't lock someone up forever, so you have to be able to develop that community-based plan.
I do help people that the community is afraid of, but they're people too. These are individuals that will be back in our community. So we can either try to help them or they'll reoffend.
In my relationship with my judge or the judges that I work for is very important because they depend on me to communicate back with them. They depend on us to enforce the orders that they set forth. They expect us as probation officers to hold the offender accountable, and all those are very dynamic issues throughout a process.
Probation is, in my view, an arm of the court. The probation officer isn't technically my staff, but they're sort of the court's eyes and ears with respect to that human being for the length of their sentence. And so they serve as reporters to us. They also serve as advisors to the court because as they prepare violations, they make recommendations.
Probation works with the prosecuting attorney's office, particularly when it comes to revocation of probation issues and things of that nature. They work with police agencies. They work with the defense bar. And so it's kind of like almost a center cog in the wheel of potential services and agencies that information flows to and from and back and forth, and to the point where it plays, I think, a key role in a community, as well as providing service for the court.
It is very important that probation officers network with community agencies such as the Department of Child Services, mental health facilities, the police departments, community corrections.
If you're looking at trying to provide safety to the community, while probation is not a guarantee, it is a major asset in being able to monitor, to know what's going on with these people, to give them a chance to truly rehabilitate themselves and to change some of their behaviors.
I think a good probation officer would have to have many traits, probably the most important of which would be patience. Sometimes an individual has to wait for their client to get to the point where they are truly ready to change, and in the meantime it may take perseverance and patience.
A lot of times I have an offender who's in here for battery because he has an anger problem. He's really not a criminal. He just has an anger problem. He's never been taught how to control his anger. So once you give him the services, he goes through the classes, and then each time he reports to me, I can see that change in him. Then I think, oh, this is someone I'm helping to get out of the system. And to me, that's what a probation officer is. It's someone who helps an individual who's made bad choices to correct those so they make better choices or the right choice that keeps them out of the criminal justice system.
I think a probation officer has to wear many hats, including that of a teacher, a counselor, a parent at times, a leader, a good role model. A probation officer has to be willing to show empathy towards their clients and respect towards their clients, regardless as to what the client has done to cause them to be placed on probation.
So a probation officer is a parent, is a police person, is an employment coach, is a counselor, is a friend from time to time. So it's a very hybrid position that requires many different skills and strengths.
I think a probation officer needs to understand the court system. And that's one of the things that I look for when they come in the door. Have you ever been in court? What that means. But it's also, you need to understand human characteristics. And, you know, undeniably, a probation officer has to believe a person has the ability to change. And if they don't, then that person should not be a probation officer. I look at John Augustus as, you know, the father of probation, but also what he brought into the field of probation. He bailed some people out of jail, took them to his house, and worked with them. And that's kind of the whole motto of what probation should be, working with offenders in the community to try and change their behavior.
I believe Mr. Augustus felt that the criminal justice system at that time in history was not working. It was failing individuals that became involved with the law, and he felt like there needed to be a better way to work with these individuals, a way to guide them and shape them and give them the opportunities that they needed to become better citizens and to make better decisions. He truly was a motivator. He gave people incentive to do better and to seek better things in life.
I believe that probation has changed substantially over the years in regards to what we are expected to do within our individual areas of assignment, whether it's through the county or through what state requirements we have.
I think it's fair to say there were no standards in 1966 when I started. There were no exams. There were no evaluations. There was no training. And so it was a lot depended on the individual probation officer and their ability to see their role clearly and to work hard at it.
You know, it used to be something you either had the skill or you didn't, and now we are teaching our probation officers how to do these things and how to motivate their offenders. We're looking at what works and what doesn't work. It used to be the mindset of the probation officer to figure out what they think works. Well, you know, now we've done studies on this and we see what motivates people. We see how to affect change within individuals. We look at cognitive behavioral therapy, thinking for a change programs, things like that that were never used.
When I first started, everything was a paper file. Now in Marion County at least, we don't use paper files at all. So it has been an adjustment for some senior staff, including myself, to move away from having the hard paper file that you can flip open and write your notes in. We take our contact notes from appointments. Everything is entered directly into the computer. One of the big challenges with that is actually, you know, it took a while for us to figure out how to make that work during an interview. You know, do you sit and type directly into the computer while you're interviewing the kid and the family? That can be a little bit distracting. But on the flip side, if you don't do that, then you're doing your interview and you're turning around and taking more time to enter your notes into the system. So it was slowing the process down on that side. So we've had to learn how to adjust that entire process and just get used to using the computer. All of our court orders, all of any report that goes to court, all of that is in the computer now.
From the perspective of supervision of offenders, again, entirely different world. We now do things like electronic monitoring. We use GPS systems to monitor where people are going. We have, well, on the medical side, we use DNA testing. We do instant drug testing, which is a world of difference for us. Typically, if you wanted to find out if an offender had used drugs, they'd submit to a test. It would take a week or two to get that test result back, and by then you might have lost track of that offender. Now we know within 30 seconds whether or not an offender has used some sort of substance, and that makes a world of difference in providing effective supervision for them. We do a lot of things electronically. We share information electronically, which is nice. Back in the day, if you needed information or records on an individual, you'd write up that request and stick it in the mail and wait 3 weeks to get any information back, and usually by then the offender had already been sentenced and you never got the information you needed. Now with the click of a button, you have access to a world of information.
It's made our job a whole lot easier in the fact that we're able to provide statistics now. We can see how many cases we're supervising instead of hand counting. We can take a look at run a listing report maybe possibly of how many offenders we have that are in violation. So what technology has provided us is with a better means to track what we're doing, and if we're doing it well, if we're not doing it so well.
The job's changed a lot over the years, including a lot of different aspects that probation officers years ago didn't have to deal with. And along with that becomes some of the, I think, liabilities and issues that a more professional probation staff is required to have.
I think the level of professionalism among probation officers and in probation departments is vastly higher than it was even 15 years ago. And the only, the central reason why it's valuable to do that is because people who are carefully chosen, carefully trained, and supported have a better chance of pushing their criminal defendants towards a more productive life.
I would hope that the general public ultimately would come to understand that the probation officer position needs to be a professional position. It needs to have a certain level of skill set that goes with it, that there needs to be a high level of training, that longevity as a probation officer is generally a very good thing.
Early on, there was a great deal of turnover in probation, and once the salary schedule went into place and some of the more professional aspects of the field were expanded upon, individuals began staying in probation longer.
I think the salary schedule has greatly enhanced the field of probation. It has helped us tremendously retain quality, educated probation officers in the field, and that's what it was designed to do.
To be a probation officer in Indiana, you have to be 21 years of age, you have to be a U.S. citizen, you have to have good moral character, you have to pass the certification test within 6 months of becoming employed.
To me, the most important one is that they have a bachelor's degree. I think that is because we are saying that this position is important enough that we want someone who's been educated post high school in a discipline where they have had to apply themselves. Continuing education is critically important as well, and each probation officer has to have 12 hours of continuing education each year.
You have to attend the orientation. Probably about 4 years ago, every probation officer went to orientation, got a 2.5-inch binder. They now get a folder because everything else, standard PSI forms, standard PDRs, the standards themselves, they're all on our webpage.
We want to be a professional agency. We want to be professionals in our field, and the Indiana Judicial Center provides that opportunity.
The Judicial Center is the staff agency of the Judicial Conference of Indiana. The Judicial Conference of Indiana is made up of all the judges of the Supreme Court, all the judges of the Court of Appeals, the Tax Court, and all the county, superior, and circuit courts in Indiana.
Our job as the staff agency is to provide support and we provide all the education and training for the judges and for their staff. And we try to provide as much technical assistance. We provide research. The Judicial Conference has 21 committees, and we staff all of those committees with the attorneys in our office.
The biggest thing about the Judicial Center, and they educate, one of their purposes, I shouldn't say sole purpose, is the education component. They have many committees of judges. They have committees of probation officers. I serve on several of their committees, like the Problem Solving Court Committee. I've been on that for a long time. And we work together for the greater good of probation departments and courts in the state of Indiana.
The Probation Advisory Board is a board consisted of probation officers that are either elected or appointed. There are 17 districts in Indiana. Each district has a representative. They basically run for 3-year terms, so there's actually 3 groups, and they're staggered, so therefore there's consistency to the board. The 17 nominate themselves. I mean, number one, you have to want to do it, to come down and go to the meetings and do the extra work, because it's a non-paid position. It's something that you volunteer for, and of course, it's like anything else. There can be a lot of time devoted, or there can be as little as possible time devoted. But for the most part, everybody that puts their name in, they desire to help the field.
I work in a city court, and as far as I know, I am the only person that sat on that board that has been from a city court. That board in general gives a voice to probation. It increases our ability to act in a professional fashion. It gives some legitimacy to what we do. It allows us some control over what we do. We have a voice, and we are able to let our leaders know what works and what doesn't work. It means something to my staff that our court has a say in what goes on. They absolutely love that. So it's very motivational to them. So I guess, like I said, it gives us a voice, and at the same time, it's motivational for our staff that we have a say in what we're doing. It's not something that's just handed down to us. And even to the smaller courts, we're heard and we're represented. So that's really important.
It also provides information to all probation officers across the state of Indiana as to what's happening in probation around the state. It assists with an annual conference in May that all probation officers are invited to attend to update them on the latest legislation and different technologies and programs that are available to probation.
It serves as an opportunity for probation officers at the state level to talk and work through the issues that are currently in the field. They have 3 committees. They have the Hot Topics Committee, which I've served on for the last 2 years. Prior to that, I was on the Education Committee. And then there's the Supervision Committee. And the Supervision Committee I'm excited for right now because they're looking at changing the PSI, which hasn't been updated since the early 90s.
After an offender has been found guilty of an offense or entered into a guilty plea for an offense, a sentencing hearing is scheduled for that offender, and a judge will order that a pre-sentence investigation report be done. The pre-sentence investigation report, or PSI, is essentially a gathering of background information about that offender. We look at things like a family history, we look at employment history, educational history, we look at health situations, be it physical, mental, substance abuse issues. The obvious thing we look at is a prior criminal history. We will do risk assessments of these individuals to determine where they are at risk-wise, try to determine what their needs are to help prevent recidivism.
The PDR, or predispositional report, is similar to the PSI, or pre-sentence investigation, on the adult side. It's a report that's going to contain all the information about that specific juvenile. So his family background, his educational background, including grades, attendance, behavior. If he's ever been employed anywhere, that information will be there. Any kind of services he's previously participated in. It's basically a summary of everything in regards to that specific kid.
Gather all of that information together. It's put into a report format, and that information is submitted to our judge along with a sentencing recommendation on what we feel is appropriate for that offender based on their risk assessment and their history. Judges typically use that information to help to fashion an appropriate sentence for the offender. Once an offender is sentenced, that pre-sentence report will follow them wherever they go, be it to probation, be it to the Department of Corrections, to a community corrections program. That's the first point of contact that an outside agency has with this offender, to know what kind of individual that they're getting, what risk and needs are presented with that offender.
In this report, you want to make sure it's as accurate and as thorough as possible. So it may involve contacting the former high school, it may involve contacting the employer, or finding out what happened with this case in another state that he's not real sure about what's gone on with it. It's doing the behind the scenes work. It's getting the facts, formulating it together, and then presenting the information to the court. And being able to look at what the sentence is, what the statute opportunities are for that particular sentence, and coming up, and you feel a very valuable part of the process and as a pre-sentence investigator or as a pre-sentence writer.
It not only gives us information that we need, but I think it speeds up the process of sentencing, where we don't have to have on-the-record inquiries to try to obtain some of that information. Obviously, if we're going to try to assess the risk to the community as versus the impact on the defendant's family and things of that nature, it's very helpful to have a good pre-sentence investigation report.
In order for us to know what we should target and focus on with an individual, we have to know what we're dealing with. What are the areas of that offender's life? And we take that information together and we actually tabulate it into a scoring system whereby if the offender answers a certain way or we have collateral information to support the answer, we then give it a point ratio score, a point score. And there's subject areas, we call them domain areas, such as criminal attitudes, criminal thinking, criminal history, education, employment, family relationships, and all those have different weights and measures that this risk assessment combines together. And by us asking specific questions, we're able to score the actual instrument, and it gives us an overall score of predictive value, whether or not this offender is classified as into a very high, moderate, or low category for recidivism. And we do that because research has told us if you target the right things with that individual, you are more likely than if you don't target them to actually make an impact.
With a validated risk assessment tool, we can identify which kids or which adults are more likely to reoffend, and thus we can put our resources towards those type of individuals. On the flip side, we can also identify those people that are low risk to reoffend. And the research has shown that if you intervene with them too much, you're actually going to increase their risk of reoffending and do more damage than good by working with them.
We as probation officers are not there to do things for our clients, but we are there to motivate them and mold them and send them in the right direction to do things on their own.
Probably the biggest challenge with being a probation officer is not having control to make people change. Just having the ability to introduce them to a better way of life, to a law-abiding life. And when the offender doesn't click on it, doesn't accept it, it can become very frustrating. It's very easy for those that have been in the field for a long time to get very disheartened, to get negative when they don't see success and when they see the same things coming over and over again. An offender who continually tests positive for drugs or alcohol, the offender who always blows off appointments, the offender who doesn't take advantage of treatment. Those things are the frustrating parts of the job because you can't make people change. All you can do is give them an opportunity to change. And every time you have a contact or an interaction with an offender is an opportunity for an intervention. That may be the time. Just because the offender may not have caught on 6 times before, the 7th time may be it where they're going to really get it. And it's being able to get through those times when you're not seeing the positive results. It's getting through those times when the offenders aren't taking advantage of the opportunities. And I believe that's the most frustrating part.
The biggest challenge probably is twofold. One, working with a very difficult population, often resistant to change. That's an obvious challenge. What might not be so obvious, though, is limited resources that are available to us and available to offenders. And it's very frustrating when you have somebody that's interested in making changes in their lives, but the resources are not available to them or they can't afford them, so they struggle. And, oftentimes we're pulling our hair out trying to figure out what we can do with these individuals who want to strive and do things differently and better. But essentially, we're holding them back, and society's holding them back by not making the resources available to them.
When you're working with juveniles, unlike the adult system where you're just working with the offender, you have to work with the parents also. And the parents is a big component of working with juvenile offenders. Sometimes transportation is a problem. Sometimes if a juvenile is ordered into, for instance, into drug and alcohol counseling or into thinking errors or into anger management, a juvenile cannot just go and set those things up on their own. It's going to take a parent doing that.
For the most part, the parents are very willing to work with us, but occasionally you'll get those cases where the parent almost has more to do with the problems that the kid has than really a decision the kid specifically made. So it's important in our area to pull the parents into all the treatment plan or case plan that we develop. They oftentimes they have to participate in the counseling sessions or therapy sessions that we set up. A lot of the services we put in place involves the parents. We also have the ability to do parental participation orders with the parents, where the court actually orders them to participate in certain things, and if they fail to do so, sanctions can be imposed upon them.
Going to school and working on their education is obviously a very big component of probation conditions, and so take a child that's unmotivated to go to school, and that'd be another challenge for that probation officer, is getting that child in school and making sure they're there every day and working with the teachers and trying to make sure they're putting forth the effort.
The greatest reward is when an offender comes back and says, "You made a difference in my life. You know, the time that you told me that you wouldn't let me get away with that positive test, that was the difference." Or the time that you didn't file a violation because I told you I was ready to make a change, and you talked to the judge and the judge let me just continue on. That's the reward. And those may not come often, but when they do, wow, they're powerful. Having a juvenile who you supervised when they were 12 come back when they're 20 and they're a mom and they're a wife and they say, "I did it and I made it." I get chills just thinking about it. That's why you do this job. Take the little rewards and take them when you can, because there will be days when you will not believe you make a difference. There will be days where you question your choice in a profession. And it's taking those little opportunities of light that you see, that you've made a difference in someone's life, or for the court, or for your individual coworker, that makes a difference, because they will happen, but you need to be patient.
When somebody comes and said, "I'd like to be a probation officer," what information or what advice I give them? Stay true to helping individuals. Understand that every person is different, and they have a different, and they're complex, and we can't just use a one magic wand and change them. It takes time.
My first response will be, put your boots on and pull them up, because change is always coming, because we learn how to do things better. We may do something today, but we're continually assessing what we do to see if it's making a difference. Also being able to understand that you don't have control over everything, and there will be days when the judge will do what you don't want the judge to do, and the frustrations are many, but the rewards are all worth it.
You probably went into this field to make a difference, and don't lose sight of that. You're going to have struggles, and you are going to want to pull your hair out, and you are going to question why you ever came into this field. But always remember, you came in because you wanted to make a difference. And that difference might only be to 1 in 100, but to that one person, that difference is very important. Don't forget that.
I'm going to say, don't get discouraged. People are going to let you down. Don't be pushed around. You are the boss. If you have a problem, come talk to the judge about it.
Don't believe everything you hear. Trust your instincts. Use your supervisor's experience as a reference for you, and really try to strike that balance between the community's safety and the well-being of the offender.
I think it's very important for probation, if you're going to get into this field, that you're also a role model and participate in your community and do things that push you out there, so that when you're talking to these kids and the parents, you're also basically have an understanding of what positive programs they can get into, and start making suggestions and start encouraging them to go that way.
In the juvenile world, there's a theory that you're going to deal with about 5% of the juvenile population in your community. There's an additional 5% that are doing everything the first 5% are doing and not getting caught. So within the community, there's about 10% of kids that are violating the law continuously. But from somebody that's been in the field for such a long period of time, I have to continue to remind myself of that there are 90% of the kids in the community that are doing all right, and are not getting in trouble and doing what they're supposed to do. And that's sometimes very difficult for probation officers. We sometimes get very jaded in that belief that everybody is bad. And that's why I certainly encourage probation officers to do other things outside, to involve themselves in community parks and tutoring kids, working with those kids that are the 90%. And those probation officers tend to last longer.